Good morning, everyone, and welcome to What Tier Are We In Now? Child Find During a Pandemic. My name is Meghan Hutchinson, and I'm here to help facilitate the session. And Matt Furchalk is here to help. Today we have Dr. Meghan Garret and Dr. Katherine Palladino from Abington School District with us to present. Just a couple reminders during the session, please keep your microphone on mute. If you have questions or comments, please enter them into the chat box and we'll address them throughout the session. And our presenters have also shared the handouts to the presentation in the chat box, and I'll repost those as we go throughout as well. So I will turn it over to Katie and Meghan.
Great.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Thanks for being here. We've got quite a group this morning. We're growing by the moment.
All right. Can see, is that, Katie, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, that looks good. All right. Okay, and thank you, Meghan, for that introduction. My name's Katie Palladino. I am a certified school psychologist for the Abington School District. I'm also a licensed psychologist working in private practice. And Meghan and I are here today to kind of discuss how child find's been going during the pandemic and talking through RtII and assessment challenges we have all been experiencing since this started.
Yeah, and so same as Katie, I'm Meghan Garret, different name, but same credentials, school psychologist in Abington School District and also a licensed psychologist in the state of Pennsylvania. Kate Gilmartin, who many of you may know, she's on the NASP board and is very active in Pennsylvania for school psychology. She unfortunately has moved on from the school psych world and is in she's an administrator now at Colonial, so she got pulled into something today that she was unable to leave. So unfortunately, we don't have Kate, but please bear with me and Katie as we stumble through her content. We apologize in advance. And thank you everyone for coming this morning. We appreciate your participation.
Yeah.
This is the link to follow along with us in the slides. I did put it in the chat, and I believe Meghan just said she's also going to put it in the chat too. So we are going to try a few like technologically advanced, and I'm saying that maybe I should do the quotes for technologically advanced as far as me and Katie's capabilities for technology. So you might be there sitting like, oh my gosh, this is so simple. But so just bear with us with that too. We apologize if there's any any issues with the those type of things. Just a few funny things this morning. I think we could all probably use a little humor in our life for many reasons this morning. Just some memes about the pandemic and being educators at this time. So Dwight Schrute humor here from The Office. Mm-hmm. The classic everything is on fire, but it's fine meme. And I think we've all felt like this or are currently still feeling like this. So just wanted to kind of lighten the mood a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyone else, but I was up super late last night too. So really could use some humor. Okay. This is what we're going to be covering this morning. So like Katie said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about response to instruction and intervention since the start of the pandemic and recommendations for how school teams should be handling decision-making, instructional decisions, things like that. And then we'll also move into the evaluation piece, which I think is probably something that we've all been struggling with too, with how do we make some of these decisions, especially when our exclusionary criteria say we shouldn't be making these decisions if there's been lack of instruction. We do want to leave a lot of time for questions and consultation. We completely understand that this is like an ongoing issue. It's also, I think for a lot of us, if we haven't lived in an area where we've experienced some kind of long-term tragedy where there's been this extended time away from school, it's new to us. There are definitely school psychologists in the country and in different states who have dealt with tragedies like this that have caused school to be closed for months at a time. And a lot of the information we're going to be sharing with you today is kind of based off of studies and things like that, research that was done about those instances. But we realize that we're all going through something different. I think as we're all realizing, Pennsylvania is a very diverse state in many ways, population-wise, where we live, whether we're in person right now or hybrid or 100% virtual as far as our instructional model. So I think we all probably have different problems and issues that we're going through at the moment. So we do want to leave a lot of time for consultation and questions. We hope that you are willing and able to participate this morning as far as, being active with the questions and things like that, because we want this to be a lot of a discussion as well. So just a few quick polls. If you can click on these links in the slides that you're following, and I'm going to click on them as well. And if it doesn't show up on my screen, I might have to stop and then reshare my screen. But we'll see what happens. The first question here is about your district's current instructional model. So Katie and I would just like to see what is your school currently doing? Are you 100% virtual? Are you hybrid? Are you 100% in person? Like I said, I think all across Pennsylvania, we're all doing something a little different. So if you click on this link here, you should be able to, Katie, did it switch to the straw poll or no?
It did. There's some comments in the chat though that folks are having a hard time printing the slides, and I just want we made them shareable on our end, right? Or do I need to?
It just looked like some of the export options were disabled. We can take care of that afterwards and post them. So don't worry about it right now.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. And if you need me to put these links in the chat, just let me know. Here's the first straw poll. I'll put that in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds to, and here's our results. Katie, did that show up as well?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Good.
It's working.
Right. Hey.
Yay. That's one win.
Doing good.
2 more links and a Jamboard and some breakouts to go.
And it's sad because I think, Katie and I are technically millennials, but we're old millennials.
Yeah, I'm
we're old
I'm barely a millennial.
So technology should be in our wheelhouse. Really, maybe not.
Yeah.
So it looks like most of you are, the votes are still coming in, but it looks like most of you are in some kind of hybrid model, which honestly, if looking at all of the research that Katie and I have been pulling from, almost seems like the most complicated of the 3 main options we have right now to navigate all of this, because you have some students who are coming in person some of the time, and then you have a whole cohort of students who are still 100% virtual if your district gave them that option. So it almost seems like that's the hardest, I think, to plan for and to navigate, because you have kids doing multiple different models when you're in hybrid. So it looks like we're about over half of you are doing some kind of hybrid model. So let's get to our next question. And this is, how are you testing students? So I'm gonna, once again, I'll put this link into the chat. Let me click on it here. Clear out those. So it's how are you currently testing students? So are you doing in person with protection with PPE, virtual assessments only? Are you not permitting testing at this time? Which I think if we had done this earlier, it might have been, if we'd done this back in like March, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But we'll see those results as they come in. Oh, wow. Well, we'll give it some time for everyone to.
If only other results were this quick, right?
Oh, as my phone dings with results, with updates. So I think we can assume, though, from these results, as you guys are coming in and voting, most people are doing in-person testing with personal protective equipment.
Good.
There are some of you who are not doing testing right now, so that's interesting as well. It looks like the majority of us are seeing students in person for that service. I'm going to move on to the next question just for time's sake. But thank you everyone for participating in these little polls we have. I'll post the next one in here. This question is about your district's use of RtII. So this is, asking if your district is using RtII as a teaching support process only, or are you a school district who uses it as a teaching support process and for SLD identification, which I would expect would only be very few districts across Pennsylvania. And you can select a few different options for this, because obviously it's going to change too. Are people using the discrepancy model for SLD identification? I apologize. I live in Philadelphia and that is someone's car alarm. Awesome. I love working from home. Thank you, neighbors. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. So it looks like a lot of you are using the discrepancy model for SLD identification, which I think we expected. There's really only a very, if we're talking about public schools, very few who are able to use RtII as an SLD identification model. However, those of you who are in private practice or who are working in, the private school sector, you might be using that as a model for SLD identification as well. And some of you might be using third model identification for SLD as well. I think that's probably where some of you are saying other. Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for doing that. We appreciate it. And I'm glad the technology worked. Another piece of technology we can try out. So this is our little Jamboard question. Because we want this to be as discussion and question based as possible, along with the the information we're going to be presenting, we do want you to tell us a little bit about what you've been experiencing during COVID. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced as working as a school psychologist in the district? It could be different for everyone. Like I said, just all of us going through different things right now. So if you join our Jamboard here, Katie, how do we add a sticky note?
So over on the left-hand side, you see those 4 icons. That's the sticky note. Yep.
There's a sticky note.
And then you can just type in your biggest challenge and post it up.
Okay.
Megan H., if you have a minute to copy that link to the Jamboard and put it in the chat, that might be easiest for folks.
Sure, I'm working on that right now.
Thank you.
So yeah, if you press the sticky note here, the thing that looks like a post-it, you should be able to post your biggest challenge. I'm going to do that right now too. So my biggest challenge this year has been
managing all the parent requests for special ed. I'm with that sticky.
Oh yeah, wait, yeah. Can I change my answer?
That would be my sticky. We got another of the parent requests. We're gonna have a stack of stickies over there. And you can move the stickies around too, folks, if you wanted to. It's automatically going to put it in the upper left. Yeah, there you go. You can drag it so everyone can see.
Yeah, I'm moving them around. Just so
great.
Kind of.
Oh, being an intern. I cannot imagine being an intern during these times. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I have a practicum student right now and I constantly am telling her how awful I feel for her.
Yeah.
It's just so hard.
Lapses in instruction.
Everyone figured out how to change the colors too. Good.
Yeah, nice.
I'm impressed with all of your technology, everybody. Parent requests, yeah. Students not completing work. I feel that one too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Parents making requests and then you can't get anything from them after that. They request an evaluation and they're like, okay, peace out. I'm not going to talk to you again. Connecting with students, especially the younger ones, for sure.
Yeah.
Attendance issues. Oh, finding a job.
Ooh, how to make SLD determinations. There is no SLD in distance learning, right? We will talk about that in a little bit.
Managing unrealistic expectations of teachers and students. Yeah, doing FBAs. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Is that a topic for this app? I hope someone did that. Virtual FBAs. Can someone make it a topic if it's not?
The FBA question is real.
Yeah.
Oh.
Implementing interventions consistently for sure.
Teachers being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
Tackling systems issues. Yep. Finding a job after graduating. I do think our job security is going to be pretty good going forward. I don't have any hard data to support that. That's just my 2 cents after 14 years of doing this.
Oh, autism referrals. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How do you determine if someone has autism if they can't interact with kids socially in person?
Yeah.
Good question.
We're going to talk
Learning
about
to administer
that
tests on iPads. Oh, come to Abington. We're doing that right now.
Yep.
We're all learning how to do the iPad.
And attendance. Yep.
Yeah. Attendance, lack of instruction, getting good curricular data. I mean, these are all wonderful.
Oh my goodness. I see being a first year psychologist too. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And we can actually save this as a PDF. If it helps folks to see it later, we can actually share that once we figure out the best way to share the slides. I hope through this exercise, you realize you are not alone, because I think we all share the majority of these concerns.
I just downloaded this as a PDF, so we can share this out hopefully later. I'll add it to my Google Docs, and then we can send it out.
Yep.
So kind of see. Maybe this could be something you could keep in your back pocket when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
No, you're definitely not. You're in good company.
We're all with you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for indulging us in our technology experiments here.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to go through just kind of what happened with the COVID timeline in terms of regulations that we received before I turn it over to Meghan and talk about RtII. As we mentioned before, we do want to answer as many questions as possible, because we know based on that recent activity, there's a lot of questions we have to answer. So please feel free to interject with questions into the chat, and our moderator will let us know if there's questions we need to answer. So this is kind of the unofficial COVID timeline. March 13th, we all grab as many protocols and scoring manuals as we can to write from home. Sometime around the 20th, we probably started binging The Tiger King or something of interest on Netflix or Hulu or any of the things. Around the 22nd, we started kind of worrying maybe about what would happen with the special ed timelines. And then after March 22nd, it was a constantly, we're constantly taking in new information while trying to complete work that was being done remotely, trying to reassure parents and teachers that everything is fine. And then we're also trying to remember what day it is, because we're not really accustomed to this, when the world shuts down and we're all at home 24/7 type of living. So now moving on to our more official timeline, around the 13th is when Governor Wolf indicated PA schools would close. Then around the 15th, PDE clarified who is the essential personnel. And they also clarified the FAPE mandate. FAPE is the free appropriate public education mandate, and basically stated that if we are not providing new instruction, there is no FAPE mandate. However, once instruction is new, you're back on the hook for FAPE. So that gives us at least a second to breathe a sigh of relief in terms of getting through our timelines and things like that. However, 2 days later, the Office for Dispute Resolution assured us that yes, due process hearings can still happen. Then shortly after that, we realized that Keystone and all of our high stakes testing were being canceled for the year. So we can kind of see that there's some more significant changes that are going into play. And then around the 9th, that was when Governor Wolf decided we weren't going back to school for the remainder of the school year. So that was kind of when we kind of realized that, hey, all those files that are sitting in our office are going to have to wait. And we tried to figure out the best way to keep track of referrals and issues that occurred while we were not in-person schooling. There was then clarification around the 15th of April that said ESY could be permitted any day following the end of the school year and could be in person. So that kind of gave us some indication that over the summer we could do some in-person work. And then PDE issued some guidance, including how to give tests during times when we were shut down. And they said, we want to make sure that our tests are being given as normed, and they weren't really encouraging doing virtual WISCs and things like that. And then this is just a study completed by EdWeek about what schools were doing at the start of this current school year. 74% of the 100 largest districts chose remote learning only as their back to school model, which accounts for about 9 million students. Almost half of all districts opened with some form of remote learning. Hybrid instruction has been used in 27% of the school districts, and full in-person instruction was available to all students for 24% of the districts. And for us, Meghan and I work in the same district. We started fully virtual. We're still virtual. We have anticipated plans to return to hybrid later this month. And Dr. Kate's district had started back hybrid a couple weeks ago, I think.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and our districts are actually pretty close to each other. We're in the same county, like the lower Montgomery County area. So there's even variability in terms of what is being done just with your neighbors next door.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is just a little map. Same thing. It's just as of the first day of school, what the state guidelines were saying. So what were governors and state laws saying about what was allowed to happen with schools as of the first day of school. So this could have changed. So interesting to me, maybe to some of you, that the states were ordering that in-person instruction had to happen in certain states. I did not realize that. You can see most states have opted to let school districts decide whether what option they're going to choose. So individual districts can, in Pennsylvania specifically, can choose whether they want to do 100% virtual, hybrid, all in person, or other options that they've come up with. So I think we all have experienced learning disparities, even when we're not in this situation. But I think some of the things that we've all been going through the last 8 months, we've seen, I think different districts, depending on their resources, depending on their population, depending on where they are, rural versus urban, things like that. We've all had varying degrees of preparedness for the virtual learning. There's districts who have already been one-to-one on devices. So when they decided to go, when we had to go 100% virtual, those districts were a little bit more prepared because all of their students already had a device that they could access instruction on at home. I can speak for, me and Katie in Abington. Our district was not prepared as far as the one-to-one devices. So that was like hurdle number one, and actually continues to be one of our main obstacles at the moment, is not everyone having a district issued device in order to access education. I don't know if anyone's tried to buy, you may have even personally tried to buy your own device right now, whether it's a laptop, iPad. It is, even for private, for not school districts, it's hard to find technology at the moment. I think there's just a lack of, availability for those things right now. Age effects and familiarity with technology. I think we've experienced that, and even some of you said that in your Post-it notes. Younger kids. I don't know. I work in a K-6 building. I'm finding that, one of the biggest issues that teachers are coming across is these kiddos aren't, they're not independent with technology yet. So they don't know how to use a computer mouse. They don't know how to click on a Zoom link and open it up and do all those things that maybe high school and junior high kids are able to do on their own because they've been using technology for longer. Also, I think from the social aspect and the connection and things like that, I think our junior high and high school students are a little bit better able to connect virtually. They've been using things like FaceTime and texting for so long now that it is a little bit more natural for them to maybe engage and connect with others and make friends online, whereas our younger students are just not used to that. This is, they're used to getting out on the playground and, sharing swings and slides and things like that. So I do think that we're seeing, those age disparities for sure. Individual learning styles. I've gotten, our district is pretty unique in the way that we handle some of these situations. So at the elementary level, we have school psychologists in every single elementary school, but the way we're able to do that is we don't have school counselors, or we have some, but they're not in every single building. So I do get a lot of kind of the first line for a lot of those issues. My child's not doing well, or my child is doing well. And I would say I'm about 50-50 right now for parents who are reaching out and saying, my kid really likes this. So when we're talking about hybrid, we're staying 100% virtual. And then you have, just as important and just as loud, the parents on the other side who are saying, this is absolutely not working for my kid. And not only do I want hybrid, but I want full in-person 5 days a week. So I think it does depend on individual kids. Some are really apt to this online learning, and some are really just it's not working for them. And then our issues of equity, they've always been there, but I just think COVID it's exacerbated them. Students who are living in poverty, our Black and Brown students, underserved populations, these hybrid and 100% virtual programs are discriminating against them for lack of resources, lack of access. And I'm sure there's other disparities too that we're not covering, but those were just the main ones that we've been noticing that I'm sure all of you have also been noticing. You may have others that you've come across as well. So just a little bit on the numbers here, since we're all school psychologists and we love numbers. The FCC estimates that around 600,000 Pennsylvanians don't have access to broadband internet. Now, I already prefaced this with my lack of technology understanding. What the threshold to be considered broadband is depends on how many megabytes. I hope that's the right word.
Yeah, it's mega or giga, I forget.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
How many of the things?
How many of the things you can download at a certain rate, I believe. Someone out there is really mad on their computer right now. They're like, no, that's not what it means. But anyway, there is a threshold for what is considered to be broadband internet. And 600,000 Pennsylvanians do not have that. Rural administrators have come out and they've said that there's 50% of their students just cannot connect to the internet in their homes. And that's due to, obviously the landscape of those districts and counties, and the availability of broadband internet in those areas. In Philadelphia, there's 14,000, almost 15,000 kids who don't own a computer, and that was in 2018. And they believe that that's a pretty accurate number for 2020 as well. So how much learning has been lost? I think it's hard for us to figure that out right now, right? Especially as it's still going on. We're not done yet, even though, never mind. Okay. COVID's not over yet. I don't know. I don't think that should be a controversial statement. COVID's not done. The pandemic is not over. So the way that groups who are researching this are trying to determine how much learning could be lost in this process is looking at other scenarios, other tragedies that have happened in other areas, whether it's America or across the world, and using studies that have been done about those children who are in those areas and what was their learning slide or what was their instructional deficit over time. So there was an earthquake in Pakistan in 2005 where children missed 3 months of school. Following that earthquake, researchers started working with the families and those children, and they found that 4 years later, the students were learning at levels that were 1.5 school years behind where they should have been. So even missing that short amount of time caused learning deficits later on. And that was for the majority of students who experienced that tragedy and who were affected by that earthquake. In 2006, 1/3 of children affected by Hurricane Katrina. This is studies that were done following Hurricane Katrina. So they found that 1/3 of the children who were affected by the hurricane were found to be at least 1 year behind for their age. And there is so much information, I think, because just geographically, Hurricane Katrina, didn't necessarily affect the Northeast like it did the South, obviously, and in other parts of the country. So I don't know that I really did a deep dive on that kind of information before. And in doing this presentation, there is so much. We could have sat here for 90 minutes and talked about just the data on Hurricane Katrina and kids who were affected. A lot of families were displaced after the hurricane and moved to all different places in the country. Colorado was a large state that received people from who were displaced from Hurricane Katrina. And there's a lot of research about those students who moved to different states and what happened once they got there. So if you have the time, if you need a distraction, maybe look at that. So this phenomenon is sometimes called a school closure slide, meaning that when schools are closed for a certain amount of time, there's a slide in academics, a slide downward, obviously. And so researchers at the Brookings Institute have been doing some research. They've come up with a very complicated statistical way of figuring out and predicting how much learning might be lost depending on how much time we're out of school. And maybe statistics nerds out there, maybe you want to deep dive into into some of that, but it was very hard to follow for someone who actually, and I do like statistics. But anyway, so the shock, if you look at this slide here, the shock that they're referring to is the loss of school time. It's the tragedy, the being out of school. It's called, in this study, they're calling it a learning shock. So what this is proposing is that these are third grade students. So they're predicting a cohort of third grade kids who have lost instruction during COVID. Now, this is what they will be doing in 10th grade. So this is showing you by 10th grade where they might be depending on what happens. So if students in third grade, if it causes a 1/3 loss of third grade, so 1/3 loss of curriculum in third grade, by 10th grade, those students will be 1 school year behind, -1 school year. Now, if those third grade students, don't participate in 1/3 of the curriculum, and then there's remediation efforts once they come back to school, we could see them by 10th grade being maybe half a grade level behind. And then what they're proposing in this study, because they're also talking about a lot of the remediation and curriculum changes that need to happen once kids can return to school. What they're saying is by grade 3 or in grade 3, if students lose 1/3 of their instruction, but when they come back, there's remediation and reorientation of instruction. So core instruction changing, then we could actually see them not only regain what they lost, but also actually be higher than they should be. Which is what we always want, right? Like we always want students to be better than what we would expect. And there is a link in our resources slides to this study and to the ongoing research that Brookings is doing about this topic. So basically, here's what we're left with. How do we figure out who's behind when everyone's behind? Good question, right? I think we're all in that boat right now. Many of you know, although there are some newer school psychologists here, some interns and students. So we just wanted to kind of review why we're going through some of this information, because our roles as school psychologists, we're not just testing machines, although it feels like that sometimes. We are involved at the systemic level, at the district level, at the school level, in our MTSS and RtII teams, whatever we call those in our school, those pre-referral teams. We are called upon to help the teams make decisions, use data to make those decisions, come up with pre-referral interventions and strategies. We do have to balance our special education evaluations, reevaluations, and new requests. I think a lot of you were mentioning that in your post-its. Are the parent requests right now it's a big issue. We're also IEP team members, so we need to work with compliance and work with our special education teachers on that. And also the student advocacy piece. We need to advocate for equity in our schools and making sure that students have access to the things that they need socially, emotionally, even technology. I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I've been to kids' houses this year, dropping off laptops. Never done that before. No, certainly not in my school psychology list of duties for sure. But that's what was needed. These kids needed laptops. There was no one, or there was a delay in getting those laptops to the kids. So of course, I'm going to pick up those laptops from the office and bring those out to those students. So I think, Under normal times, there's a lot of things that we're required to do as school psychologists, but under these circumstances, there's even more. And I think, our job responsibilities are expanding rapidly. So we know, before we test or before we recommend testing for a student, we want to make sure that we're advocating for a return to core instruction using classified interventions, collecting screening data prior to considering testing as we come back from this prolonged school absence. We want to make sure that students are getting back to core instruction and that we're looking at the core instruction. Is it effective? We want to make sure that we're reviewing foundational skills that may have been lost, that we're looking at previous material from last school year and reviewing and making sure that we're making up for some time lost. We want to make sure that instruction is explicit and systematic. And we want to be using, instead of more summative assessment that I think most school districts are used to with unit tests and, midterms, finals, things like that. In this time, as we're coming back to school, we definitely want to be using more formative assessment because we want to be looking at, are students able to regain anything that they lost? And are they able to keep with their typical learning pace that they were prior to the school closures? So relying on midterms and finals and things like that is not going to be helpful. We need to be doing formative assessment frequently throughout the year as we're coming back to school to see what students are doing. Are they able to recoup? It's almost, and I keep thinking about this as I was doing this research and as I'm talking about it now, I'm really reminded of how we think about the criteria for extended school year in the summer. When we're talking about kids once they go out for winter break or when they're out of school for summer breaks, and are they able to recoup those skills when they come back to school in September or when they come back to school in January? It feels very reminiscent of that. We need to see who's able to make up for the lost time and who's not. And that's kind of our marker for who would need to be tested or who might need more interventions at this time and who, the core instruction will work for. As always, the over-identification and under-identification of students is going to be a tricky balance at this time. Because if we're only going to be looking at current data, you're going to find a lot of students are qualifying. And maybe they wouldn't have under normal circumstances. So that's something really that we need to consider. And really, us as consultants during this time is going to be super important. Making sure that tier 1 support is available academically, socially, emotionally, offering trauma support at tier 1, everything that, even things that maybe used to be considered tier 2, tier 3 in an MTSS format need to be pushed to that tier 1 because more of our students need it now than ever before. So let's talk a little bit more about those MTSS RtII team decisions. I'm going to focus more on the academic for this presentation just because with only a limited amount of time, we want to make sure that, we could talk forever about trauma and social emotional, but we're going to stick to academic. And I think you're going to find specifically we're going to be talking about reading because I think most of us under normal times would consider we probably have better data about reading than math, unfortunately. Not that math's not important, but even right now, I can tell you, just speaking from our district, I don't know what math data we have. I know we have some reading data. I wouldn't be able to tell you what math data we've been collecting. So we're going to stick with academic and primarily reading. So we know that the students who are getting academic support prior to school closures are going to be even more at risk for academic regression right now, right? Because they haven't been receiving core instruction and they also haven't been receiving their tier 2 or tier 3, or what they have been receiving is just not what it was when we were, prior to COVID. Students are absent, digitally absent students who are not engaging in whatever instruction is available, whatever is going on virtually. So students may be attending the few days a week of in-person instruction, but then there's those days of the week that they need to be signing on online, right, for either asynchronous instruction or some kind of virtual learning, and they're not doing those things. And we need to provide students with support during virtual instruction, obviously, and then really ramp up the supports once we start coming back to school. So what can we do? I don't know if any of you have seen your DIBELS results or if any of you are collecting DIBELS results at the moment. It's bleak, guys. It's bleak. It ain't good. And maybe I'm speaking from our perspective in the district that I work in, where we did our fall benchmark assessment virtually, which obviously none of our reading specialists has ever done before. Our teachers have never done that before. Our students have never done that before. So there's obviously a lot of variables in that data that we need to account for. But on first glance, a lot of red. For those of you who are familiar with DIBELS, a lot of red. So step one, don't panic. Don't panic. We really have to consider all the other variables that went into that testing, and just know that there's no way we're going to get perfect standardized results from that type of administration. Even those of you who are hybrid, if you did your DIBELS in the fall in person, if you were able to do that with your students or whatever other academic screening tools that you use, there's still the question of the PPE and how that affected, right? So wearing masks, especially when you're assessing reading, if you were using sneeze guards or in social distancing, all of that kind of stuff, as we know from our standardized assessments as school psychologists, it's obviously going to affect our academic screeners too, that we're using for RtII decision making. So what can we do as members of, I'm going to use the word core team probably, you're probably going to hear me say that a few times. I'm just going to slip into that language. That's what we call our pre-referral team in Abington. It's called the core team, but that you may call it your RtII team. You may call it your MTSS team. You may call it your pre-referral team, child study team. I'm trying to think of other terminology I've used, but that's what I'm referring to when I say core team, just so you know. So during virtual instruction, if you're a school who is 100% virtual, or you have students who are in a cohort that is 100% virtual, things that you can do. One of the greatest things I've accessed during this time is home-based academic support plans. And I hope you can see this. Did it show up, Katie?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is through Intervention Central, which I know many of you are familiar with. Jim Wright and his website with a lot of research-based interventions. This is a great step-by-step plan to use when you're working with families to come up with a plan in the home. So this is a document and this is a process that should be used with parents as you're creating supports and strategies for students who are in the virtual setting, looking at their readiness to learn, academic skills, their motivation and work engagement, and the communication obviously being one of the main pieces there that really needs to be addressed. Okay, get back to this. Communication with parents. Screening efforts. I said, I let you know that Abington we did screen our students. We did do a benchmark assessment in the fall. Some of your districts may not be doing that. Maybe it's not something that your district thought would be effective at this time. DIBELS, I know a lot of us use DIBELS across the state. The University of Oregon is recommending that DIBELS benchmark assessments occur approximately 4 weeks after students have returned to school, if you're going to do it in person. To allow for obviously students to adjust, students to get ready, to students, to kind of get back into the routine before you assess their reading skills. Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction. How do we do this in a virtual world? How do we do this? I'm going to give you some things that I found from different companies, but yeah, it's there's a lot. And I think the focus for all of us during that virtual time, especially in the spring and even now, is prevent regression. That's what we're really trying to do. Prevent regression of skills. So then when schools reopen in some capacity, and a lot of you are in that position right now, we need to give students time to catch up, which no one wants to hear. Parents don't want to hear that. Teachers don't want to hear that. Administrators don't want to hear that. I don't even like hearing it sometimes. We need to give students time to catch up. There's no way in the first month, the first 2 months, maybe even the first 3 months of school, we can expect most students to just bounce back, right? I mean, aside from just the time lost of school, there's still all of the potentially trauma issues, all of the social emotional issues that may have happened, the the current and ongoing anxiety that families and kids are experiencing that could be affecting them. So to expect students to just magically come back to school and be back where they were is just not, it's not reality. And we do need to give kids that time to get back to normal or some kind of normal. You have to expect that your reading scores are going to be lower than you would typically see. And there should be some, eventually over time, getting back to your typical screening and instructional methods and the schedule that you normally do those things. So who should be in tier 2 and tier 3? How do we figure this out with our limited data? Looking at previous benchmark periods prior to instructional disruptions will be a good marker for that. So looking at students' profiles prior to COVID, were they making progress? Were they not making progress? Were they stalled? That will be helpful, obviously, moving forward. Looking at the subtest scores, especially on things like DIBELS, rather than the composite scores. So if we're looking at a composite score and the student is below benchmark, but you're looking at all the individual subtests, and there's really only 1 or 2 that they're below benchmark in, as opposed to a student who has 4 subtests that they're below benchmark in, that can be something that could be used to differentiate who needs support and who doesn't. Giving supplemental support for students whose gaps are not going to be addressed in core instruction. I'm thinking here like your 3rd and up grades. If you have a student who's showing gaps in like phonological processing or decoding skills, and we know in core instruction from 3rd grade on, that's not going to be addressed, then those students need to be prioritized. Whereas if they're showing gaps in reading comprehension, we know core instruction at those grades are going to cover those things. So just making, kind of considering some of that stuff. Considering performance on class assignments and during instruction. So what are they doing? What does it look like in class? Or what are the teachers saying about that student, obviously? And looking at percentile ranks. So we have to look at our resources. If in your district, you only have the resources to provide the lowest 25% of students with tier 2 or tier 3 instruction, then look at your scores and pick the lowest 25%, and that's who's going to get the support. It's not ideal, obviously, and no one wants to, make a decision based on that alone, but that's the world that we're in right now. We have to make decisions based on the resources that we have to provide those services. And if you are overwhelmed with tier 2 and tier 3 students, creating a tier 1 watch list. This is something that my district or my school specifically has already done in the past, because I feel like sometimes in certain grades we're already overwhelmed with tier 2 and tier 3 students. But creating students who fall kind of in those mild to moderate risk areas, maybe that 15th, 25th percentile on your screeners, and keeping them, so they're still going to be considered core instruction, they're still going to be considered tier 1, but really monitoring them maybe more often than you normally would have. So looking at them more frequently than maybe just the 6 to 8 week time period that these core teams and things like that usually look at kids for those decisions. Identifying non-instructional personnel to help out with a lot of this intervention sounds scary. I know it sounds scary to have paras and possibly adult or parent volunteers or older kids helping out with intervention, but it's a village mentality right now. We all have to.
All hands on deck.
All hands on deck. And obviously training is important and supervision is important, and having certified teachers, making sure that they're planning the activities that any of these people would be, giving to the students is obviously super important. But hey, if we have bodies, let's make use of them, and let's, try to get them, to be providing intervention for students. And then I think one of the biggest things is making adjustments to core instruction to address the needs of the students. If we're seeing gaps in a huge numbers of students in certain skills, then why aren't we changing tier 1 to meet those needs? So I think that, changes at core or tier 1 levels is really important. Quick case study. If any of you are not familiar with DIBELS and you need to know the benchmarks for each grade level, if you click on this little link at the top of the screen, it'll link you to the PDF from DIBELS Next about what the benchmarks are for each grade level. in case you're not unless you're not really familiar with DIBELS. I know some of you who work in older grades or in private sector or things like that may not be familiar with DIBELS. So you can access that. I'm not going to click on it, but it is there for you. So this is a first grade student. He was tier 1 in kindergarten, and we're looking at his DIBELS scores here. So you can tell, so end of kindergarten, we did not do DIBELS. So that was the spring of 2020. So we didn't do DIBELS, and we didn't start back with DIBELS until this fall. And remember, this was done virtually. This was not an in-person assessment here. So you can see this is a student. So for those of you, once again, who are not familiar with DIBELS, green and blue are positive. That's what we want to see. We want to see green is at benchmark, blue is above benchmark. So for all of these subtests, for sound fluency, letter naming fluency, which they don't actually score, phoneme segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency, we want to see all of these subtests in the green or blue, ideally. So you have a student here who in kindergarten, green and blue, right? We're happy. We were happy with his progress all throughout the year. If we look at his kindergarten report card, our school district goes anywhere from advanced, which is the highest rating of scores or grades, to below basic, which is the lowest rating of grades for elementary students. We can see he's advanced proficient across the board. And then third marking period, students were ungraded due to the virtual instruction that we were doing. So when this student came back to us, we did a DIBELS screener virtually, and you can see here we have below benchmark and well below benchmark. We don't have grades yet for marking period 1, but yeah, I'm seeing some of you already in the chat make some comments here. But yes, please feel free in the chat. What do you think we should do with this student? What do you think if this student was in your school? What would be the decision making just based on this data alone? Obviously, there's other data that I did not include and background information, but from what you're seeing here in the numbers and the grades, what do you think you would do with this student in your core teams or pre-referral teams? I'll give you a second to put that in the chat if you want. I see tier 1 and monitor. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Well, I think, Jennifer, everyone agrees with you. Oh, no, here we go. Maybe tier 2, depending on resource allocation, sure. Review of case skills, tier 1 is needed. Review with tier 1 and monitor. Yes, and I would agree with you guys. And that's essentially what we did with this student as well. First of all, we revamped a little bit of our first grade curriculum. We added a lot of phonemic awareness and decoding skill instruction that we were not doing previously. And then also we decided on the student tier 1 and monitor. So you guys are right. Or I said right. I don't know that there's a right decision, but I agree with what you were saying.
The most appropriate given the circumstances we find ourselves in.
There you go. That's a nice elevator speech. I like that.
Yep.
So here's a tier decision case study number 2. Once again, quickly. Looking at the data here, we have a student who looks like kindergarten and beginning of first grade, we were doing okay. Once again, you see a lot of blue and green. And then towards the middle of first grade, once we start adding ORF, which is oral reading fluency. For those of you who are not familiar with DIBELS, that's the students read a passage for a minute out loud, and we look at their accuracy and their fluency. So it's the speed and the accuracy. You can see once we got to that point, this student really started to struggle. Definitely has some of those decoding skills or was doing pretty well with those. And then once we added that fluency piece, really started to not do so well as far as DIBELS instruction or DIBELS assessment. So you can see this is a third grade student now. So for this student, we did not assess her at the end of second grade. But you can see after that gap, beginning of this year, still well below benchmark. And you can see her grades from last year. So these are second grade grades. Once again, third marking period, we did not report grades. So she's in the basic to below basic range for many areas of communication arts other than speaking and listening. So her learning to read, reading critically. Learning to read is for decoding and phonemic skills and sight words, things like that. So what for this student, what do you think? What thoughts on the student about what's here? Yep, agree, Jennifer, yep. Tier two. Sure. Because she was in tier 2 in 2nd grade, so you're right, she was getting an intervention. And I think we can probably all agree that she did not finish that intervention. So whatever she was doing at tier 2, she didn't get to the end of that intervention. Sure. Yep. So a lot of you are saying tier 2 and then monitor for tier 3 pretty closely. I agree with you. Considering our numbers right now, she is going to be in tier 2, although she is someone we're very worried about, and might move to tier 3, especially as we transition into hybrid instruction and start doing in-person reading support. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we're running low on time, as always. Katie has a lot to say and important things to say. These are different reading interventions that can be done virtually. Wilson and other programs like it have given us examples of how to do those interventions virtually. And if you click on the links, you'll be able to find more information about that. All of us on pre-referral teams, we know it's not just academic and we know it's not just reading. So these are other helpful suggestions and things like that for pre-referral teams to offer students, to give to teachers as tools to use prior to testing. And obviously, thinking about us on pre-referral teams, I know our pre-referral team is also our concussion management team. And how do we address students with concussions during virtual instruction? So there's some information there for you to review. So just a quick breakout if we just want to do, Matt, I don't know if can we change it to like 3 minutes? Really quick, or I don't even know, maybe we don't need to break out. Maybe we'll just put it in the chat for sake of time.
Either's fine, just let me know.
Yeah, let's just do the chat.
Sure, yeah, let's just do the chat because of time. But any comments on what has been working for your pre-referral process, and anything that you want to share with others, with any of us that you think might be helpful. And maybe, we can let Katie continue on here, and if you want to put that in the chat and kind of review it as people are adding things and, take a look at what people are saying that's really helpful, I think that would be, a good idea.
Great. All right, so I'm going to start by going over evaluations because those are fun during COVID. Megan, could you advance me, please? Thank you. Okay, so who has prior experience doing assessments during a global pandemic? Yep, me neither. So these were some of the challenges we've had based on the first 3 months, trying to figure out the best way to do testing, in-person teleassessment. We want to make sure we're being consistent with guidelines and safety, but we also want to make sure that we're doing things with the best fidelity possible. And I think both approaches have limitations, which we'll talk about in a minute. What do you do about classroom observations when you're all virtual? Just so you know, I'm a secondary school psychologist. I work mostly with junior high kids. I got a lot of black screens when I go in to observe kids in class. So how do you take data on classroom observations? And keeping in mind that when kids are home, it might not be the same as what you see in school. If school is virtual, what's the best way for teachers to do rating scales? If you are, again, I work at the secondary level, I've got some teachers that are looking at 30 screens of students. And sometimes you might see the student from the face up. Sometimes you might just see the top of their head. Sometimes you see their ceiling fan. So how do you use that information as a way to get data like you typically would with like your BASCs and things like that? And then how do we address the exclusionary factors related to the situation we found ourselves in? I'm going to go through some of the exclusionary factors for SLD, but I did throw some slides in on some of our other disability categories as well, as I have found resources throughout this process. Great conversations, by the way, going on in the chat. I'm going to skip over this breakout as well, just to make sure there's room for conversations and questions at the end. I think from the Jamboard, we kind of got a good sense for the challenges and successes so far. Well, challenges at least. I would add, if you've got any successes from testing this year that you would like to share, please feel free to throw that in the chat. as well. All right, so to test or not to test, or to test and how to test, that is the question, isn't it? So I've worked in a lot, I think I mentioned before, I'm in my 14th year. I've worked in a lot of different districts in several different states, and I've had varying degrees of administrative support and understanding of my job and what I do. Meghan and I are really fortunate. A lot of the key decision makers in our school district are either former school psychologists or are well versed in what school psychologists are and what school psychologists do. So in terms of getting us prepared to do testing, we were pretty well equipped, but I realize that some of you might not be in that same situation. So if you are figuring it out by yourself, make sure that you're referring to both your county and CDC guidelines for information. The infection rates are kind of on the rise across the nation right now, but it is different county by county and PA. So make sure you're looking at that information. Based on where we currently are, the things that we're currently doing is face masks are required for psychologist and student. We're using face shields, those big plastic things you might see at the doctors that cover your eyes and your face. We're using the plastic partitions that look like a bank teller thing that just have a little little opening to slide materials over to the student. We also just started this year using Q Interactive. So we're using the iPads that have a cover on them that we can sanitize. So we're reducing the use of the books and things like that could further spread contamination. We're also provided with gloves and hand sanitizer in the room so that we can use that to help further disinfect and keep everybody safe. And then before the student comes in, we have a COVID symptom screening that we go over with the family. And the family's also expected to take their child's temperature before they come in, but that's mostly done on an honor system. We're not checking that ourselves. In the private practice where Meghan and I work, we're also taking some additional steps. We also use air purifiers in our rooms to kind of keep the airflow going and make sure we're not keeping those droplets in the air. We're limiting how many people are in the office at once, and then we're also doing our own temperature checks before the client enters the office. I think one of the most important things to mention about all of this is, this is kind of what might be recommended for the public and what we know is best practice, but you have to keep in mind your own personal health. Nobody's going to take care of your health besides you. So make sure that if you have something going on or you have questions, call your doctor and talk with your doctor. They might be okay with the PPE that you're using and find that it's safe, and they might want you to do more. So just keep that in mind that while it's great that we have these guidelines and it's our best line defense, we also want to make sure that we're taking that extra step to make sure we're advocating and keeping our own health safe. So don't hesitate to reach out to your personal physicians if you feel like you need to use more stuff than what you're currently using. This is just a picture of a colleague who decided to get all her PPE prepared this summer before going back to work. She didn't feel confident that everything would be provided for her. So you can see she went and got shields and iPads, vitamins. There's a couple different air purifiers, temperature thermometers. If you had asked me way back in 2007, when I first was doing this job, if this is what it would look like, I never could have imagined it. This is it's a lot. All right, so just want to go over some discussion about teleassessment. There was a really good article that came out this summer. You'll find it on the references pages that kind of spoke through the limitations for using teleassessment for psychoeducational evaluations. So it has not been through a very thorough vetting. The use of psychoeducational assessments over telehealth platforms there's a couple companies out there that are advertising doing it, but it's not really something that's been through a thorough vetting and validation process through studies. Way back it doesn't seem way back, it was only 3 years ago, but in 2017, there was a guidance for delivery of school telehealth services document created by NASP, and they put forth a couple things that you want to consider before using a telehealth platform. The first thing to keep in mind is it's not really clear if our State Department of Ed regulations specifically address how school psychologists should be doing telehealth services. It's not clearly indicated that falls under the scope of our certifications. And also having the test materials and necessary technology might not be enough to say that it's okay for you to do teleassessment. There's a term called de minimis criteria, which is used in applied psychology to indicate the minimum criteria necessary to do something. And what that indicates is that you should have at least graduate level training with supervision of using whatever technique that you're using. Now, some of you that are newer, maybe you're current students or recently out of school, maybe your programs covered teleassessment. It certainly didn't. I went to college in the MySpace days, so we certainly didn't cover this. This is not something that was a thing way back then. So that was something that I actually had to get additional, more for my private work. I had to get additional training on through some webinars and things like that when we had to switch to that back in March. There's also technology issues that can arise. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You need to have a good high quality internet connection between you and the client. And there are some indications that there are some differences between administering the test in person and doing it remotely. There was a study done in 2018 using the readjust, which is the Reynolds Intellectual Assessment Scale. It's a more abbreviated measure of intelligence. They used evenly matched groups. And in a lot of the areas, the effect sizes between the group that did it in person and the group that did it over telehealth was pretty minimal, with the exception of 2 areas. In the area of processing speed, if you took the processing speed on the remote assessment option, you were 7 points lower than the people that were in person. And then with the full scale IQ, if you did it remotely, your IQ was 3 points lower. Your overall IQ score was 3 points lower than the people that did it in person. So there are some brief neuropsych measures that have been through a vetting process for being administered over telehealth. So there's probably some indication that we can get to a point where maybe doing these over telehealth is fine, but right now we're not there. And as you know, the state has actually come out and said that we really should not be doing anything over tele-assessment in terms of assessment. Things like interview forms and stuff like that, that's okay, because that's a conversation, but things like your whisks and your Wyatts and stuff like that, it is not recommended at this time to be doing that over telehealth platforms. So depending on where you work and depending on advice you're getting from administrators, we just wanted to go over that today and also give you a reference to some research if you need something to support your position on that aspect. All right, so I just wanted to share a quick case study. This is a student I had the opportunity to test just earlier this week. And I just thought it was interesting to share the pre and post pandemic testing. So this student was tested privately in April of 2019 by a private practitioner, and then in October of 2019 by another school psychologist in our school district. Diagnoses at the end of the evaluations indicated ADHD combined and generalized anxiety disorder. The school team did not indicate a need for an IEP. Basically, we saw, the disability was confirmed. However, the teachers didn't see a need for specially designed instruction based on they basically were saying the child's performing fine at school. So a 504 plan was recommended. And then a parent requested a re-eval this year to re-examine the need for an IEP. So I had the opportunity to test the student just the other day.
Katie, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure the date is correct. Is it October 2020? It was just this past
October. It was October 2020. Sorry.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah. So just to be clear, thank you. Just to be clear, the testing dates were exactly a year apart.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I did it wrong on this slide too. Okay. So the full scale IQ in 2020
2019, right?
2019. No, I'm right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 20.
That's
yes.
the previous one. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then I just tested them in November of 2020. Okay. So I got that right. Okay. So the full scale IQ for the student is 122. So very bright student. And the processing speed was 83. So we know that was the cognitive weakness that was found. The other scores were pretty more consistent with the 122. So the other areas, even working memory, were kind of up there. So you can see not a real big difference in the academic achievement scores for the student. There wasn't really a lot of academic concern. The main concern reported by the family was difficulties keeping up with work, participating in instruction, and paying attention during instruction. But you can see pre and post pandemic, we didn't really see a big change in the students' academic achievement scores using the Wyatt last year and the KTEA this year. So this is where, just to look at some differences in executive functioning. So these are scores from a test called the DCAFS. It's the Dallas Kaplan Executive Function System. This was administered in private practice in spring of 2019, and then by me earlier this week. So this is where I did start to see some variability. Couple things that kind of came to mind as I take a look at these scores. You could see initially with the trail making tasks, we saw some low scores in visual scanning and letter sequencing. So these are just, if you're not familiar with these tests, this one is a pencil and paper task where the student has performed different visual scanning and sequencing tasks and tasks that look at motor speed. And then you kind of look at their performance on those 4 things, and then their ability to perform an executive function skill called switching, where you're switching cognitive sets from one set to another, which is something that we need to execute a lot of tasks. So when you look at his executive functioning skill on number letter switching, I didn't see a big difference, but I did see some differences in visual scanning and letter sequencing. Now with this student, the student reports having inattention roughly every 15 minutes. So I did see some variability throughout testing where it seemed like he was more on than off. But I also think that this was the first set of pencil and paper tasks that I gave him, and he hasn't really done pencil and paper tasks since March of last year. So it was interesting that those first two things that were average back in 2019, he was really weak on now. But then as we got going and did more pencil and paper tasks later, he seemed to be perfectly fine. So that was just something, I'm not entirely sure if that's the 100% the reason why, but that was a hypothesis that I made based on the scores. You can also see, I didn't see a big difference in the verbal fluency tasks. He was a little bit slower with some of these. That's why that accuracy score was lower. Verbal fluency is a task where you have to say how many words start with a particular letter in a minute, how many words, how many animals, how many fruits in a minute, and then you switch back and forth between naming a piece of furniture and then I think a fruit or something like that. As you can tell, there wasn't really a big difference. The one area where I did see a difference was in design fluency, which that's an activity, it's a pencil and paper task where the student has to go through and make different designs and boxes. And with him, what was the biggest challenge is he really had a hard time holding his attention on the directions. He had to use designs using 4 lines, and he would use like every line in the box, no matter how many times I told him. So I do think it's interesting, examining, because this is kind of aligned with what I see. We had pretty typical pre-pandemic executive functioning skills that he was able to execute, but based on my observations during testing, I am seeing where that processing speed and also some of his inattention is really affecting him a little bit differently. And that would be kind of more consistent with, what we've been kind of seeing throughout the pandemic. So I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to wrap this case up yet, because I just got the testing done this week, but I did want to share that data because I had it with all of you. All right, so let's jump into talking about exclusionary factors for SLD. A lot of this information I got from the NASP website where they talked about COVID resources, and the links to all of those are on the references pages. So be sure to go hop on those if you want to read for more information. One of the big things that they recommended is maybe starting with your rule outs as opposed to ending with them. So if you think about our PDE report format, start with your SLD worksheet when you're getting ready to write up a report and determine if a child qualifies, and then work your way backwards to whether or not they had a discrepancy and things like that. The reason being is because a lot of your decisions about all those other factors are going to come from other pieces of data. It's going to come from your parent interviews. It's going to come from your observations, your teacher interviews, your school records, all the other things outside of the standardized testing that are really going to help you inform whether or not those exclusionary factors are something to consider. The main thing that you have to remember is that you want to rule out some of those things as if you want to make sure they are not the primary reason why the child requires specially designed instruction. So when we talk about loss of instructional time, when we talk about cultural issues, economic influences, that's happening in the world right now. Everyone in the world is experiencing some level of economic change, environmental changes, cultural changes, and loss of instruction. You just have to make sure that is not the primary reason why the child needs specially designed instruction. Some ways that you might want to consider that, it's kind of like how Meghan went through with the pre-referral questions. Look at your pre-referral data. Look at your pre-pandemic data. How is the child doing in school? Look at your family history. What was in the child's birth history, their prenatal history, what's in the family history? If you find things on all of there that are, signs pointing to a learning disability, then you probably have some data present that you could use to make the argument that the child has a learning disability and that this loss of instruction is not the primary reason why they're showing an academic need. So that's going to be the big trick, and making sure you document that in your reports. It's just, explaining why the pandemic is not the primary reason for the need for specially designed instruction. All right, so I think I mentioned this already. Observing at the secondary level is at a lot of limitations. For something for me that I experienced, I actually observed a child and thought they were pretty on task. I was taking some on task data. I talked to the teacher afterwards and realized the child had the wrong book for the entire time I observed them. I couldn't see the student's workspace because it was a younger student and I could only see them from like the head up. And the teacher only knew because this is a problem that she had dealt with the student consistently over the course of the week. So definitely whatever you observe, if you weren't already doing this, make sure you check in with the teacher. Always ask that, was this a typical day question to the teacher, and do a brief observation or interview of the teacher about your observation and what you saw. And whatever limitations you have, make sure you list it in the report. Excuse me, just make sure you list that, I couldn't see the workspace, or, I only could see the student from the head up, whatever happened, pardon me, while you're trying to observe, just make sure you note that in the report. 2 resources that I just wanted to share with you. The first was shared with permission from Tony Grandy, who is with Insight PA Cyber Charter School. He was very nice and shared a virtual classroom observation form. I forget where, it was shared somewhere earlier this year. And, that is something that I've been using that's been pretty helpful. We also have an informal teacher input form that we've been using at the secondary level for quite some time. And we adapted it to talk about virtual, oh, do I need to give access to that? Okay.
It's all right.
Okay, I'll make sure to do that as soon as we're done, to make sure that when you click on the link, you can actually get to it.
Sure.
But we modified our informal teacher input form to talk about observations they might see during virtual instruction. All right, to bask or not to bask? That is also the question. So Dr. Reynolds, who's one of the authors from the BASK, he kind of did the rounds on a bunch of different Facebook groups earlier as these questions came up. I actually posed this question in a group of for people that do private practice testing, and he kind of shared the statement that it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. There's not really one. It's not, yes, you should always do the BASK in the setting. No, you shouldn't ever do the BASK. You really have to look at your referral questions and what you're trying to answer and make the best decision. So at the start of the school year, I gave the BASK because we had, I did a couple cases for the elementary schools. The teachers were seeing the kids every day. I was able to get some BASKs from last year's teacher. So I felt like it was able to provide meaningful data that helped me with my referral questions. Currently, with a lot of my secondary cases, I haven't been giving the BASK. Most of my referrals are for ADHD and internalizing issues like anxiety and depression, which if you're teaching a class of 30 in person, that can be kind of hard and to pick up on some of those behaviors with my teachers at least. So doing that virtually is even more challenging. So what I've been relying on mostly is using the BASK with parents and kids, and then relying on teacher interviews to kind of get some more input on classroom functioning and things like that. And then of course, using like a diagnostic interview. So I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. I just think you should just, again, state your rationale behind why or why not you used formal rating scales.
To just jump in here, Katie, for a second about the younger grades.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I don't know how other school psychologists around the state are feeling about this, but I do think junior high, high school kids, if you go into those classrooms, cameras are off, mics are off. You really can't see anything. So I think teachers would be, kind of operating blindly on a BASK to try to figure out what's going on. But even for K to 6, I mean, yes, a lot of cameras are on, and yes, a lot of kids are, jumping in and turning their mics off to say stuff. I don't know that based on what I've seen in those virtual classrooms, that a teacher could fill out a BASK. So what I've been doing is talking to the teachers ahead of time, sending a copy of the BASK to them to say, hey, here's what I would be asking you if I were to, email you the remote scale to fill out. Do you think you have enough information to fill this out based on what you know of the student? And if not, then, obviously not sending it and relying more on the interview and those type of things. Hybrid instruction, I know, Katie and I have not experienced that yet, but a lot of you are doing that right now. I'd be interested to see, from what we see in hybrid, if we have enough for teachers to fill out BASK too. I mean, with all the mitigation measures, with the PPE, with the mask, with the social distancing, the limited number of kids in the class. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see once Katie and I experience that. But those of you who have experienced that, who are doing hybrid right now, maybe you could weigh in on that too when we get to the discussion.
Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to just fly through the last couple slides. I just want to point out, Jennifer shared in the chat that all the virtual instruction is asynchronous. So obviously you're in a situation where you can't observe and probably can't get teacher rating scales. So you're just going to note that in the report. Done. That way, if you ever got called into question, you could say, this is why it wasn't there, because all of our learning is asynchronous right now. So just a couple quick notes on autism. We don't want to withhold these evaluations because kids need these interventions. If you are ADOS trained, you want to read the statement from WPS on using the ADOS during this time. They wrote about limitations you want to consider and before giving that assessment. Kathy Lord, who's one of the ADOS authors, also made a presentation on how to do assessment of autism during social distancing. And she actually created a modified ADOS that you can called the BOSA that you could look into doing. But just remember, you have alternative options. There's interview-based options that can be done in person, over the phone, or over telehealth. The MIGDIS 2, there were some great trainings at NASP last year on that, if you want to check that out. There's also the ADI, which is wonderful at Long, and the CARS 2. All right, so ED, I don't think this is a big surprise. We're expected to see mental health needs of kids double or triple after COVID. Right now, we know 20% of kids experienced difficulties with anxiety and depression 1 month into quarantine. And we want to be mindful of that over a long period of time part of the ED classification criteria. So typically, you know, what experts say, both legal experts and due process experts, is that over a long period of time typically means 6 months. We've been pandemicking for 7. So kind of like what we're talking about with SLD, what you want to make sure is it's not the primary reason for the student's emotional difficulties. Everybody's struggling in the world right now with all of this. Our lives have been turned upside down. We're all triggered. We all have anxiety. We've all experienced loss. It's existing in different degrees for everybody in the world right now. So just explaining why that's not the primary reason why the child needs specially designed instruction. Looking at your pre-referral data, looking at their history, get the releases to talk to the therapist if they're involved with the family, and really relying on your records reviews and things like that to help you tease that out is probably what's going to be your best bet at this time, in addition to the other things you do as part of an ED eval. And this is my life. Everybody thinks everybody has ADHD. So kind of like what we've been saying, make sure you're taking a thorough history. Because it's hard to get teacher data, I've actually been trying to do in-person tests of attention. If you're trained in these, the DCAPs, the CPT, the CATA, the NEPC2, and the TOVA are all examples. If you're not trained in those, it's, you know, again, get the parent info, get the student info, take observations best you can during testing. And also keep in mind, you know, what's the demand being placed on the kids and the learning style your district's using, and how does that line up with where they're at developmentally? Right now, what we're doing virtually, it places high demands on executive functions for teenagers that aren't fully developed till they're 22. So I think we're kind of seeing a bigger gap, and that's something I try to talk through with parents before we launch into, you know, the whole testing conversation when they call and ask my opinion. And obviously examine all your referrals with a trauma-informed lens. If you're overly anxious or been through trauma through all of this, you're not going to focus too well, because that, you know, when you think of like upstairs brain and downstairs brain, upstairs and downstairs, downstairs brain takes over upstairs brain when you have a lot of emotions going on and you can't focus that well. So just make sure you're considering that with all your referrals.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Katie, because like, you know, dealing with the younger kids, 5, 6, 7-year-old, is it developmentally appropriate for a 6-year-old to stare at a screen for 6 hours a day? I don't know that. I mean, I don't know if it's developmentally appropriate for me as a 35-year-old to do that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, definitely not appropriate for a 5, 6, 7-year-old to be expected to do that. Definitely a lot of talk with parents about, you know, what is being expected of their kids right now versus what they should be able to do. And unfortunately, you know, and then trying to get parents to understand the difference there.
So big takeaways, you know, expect more tier 2 and 3 students. Make sure you breathe. During virtual instruction, make sure the focus is on preventing regression. Adapt tier 1 to meet your needs. Adapt tier 2 and 3 to meet your resources. And consider everything that you know about the kid pre-disruption when you're making decisions. I think I said this before, I'm going to say it again. This is a huge challenge. Do the best you can with the resources you have and the circumstances you find yourselves in. There is no handbook on practicing school psychology during a global pandemic. Maybe one of you interns or rookie school psychs out there can write the handbooks, and this is how you're starting your career. But there is no best practices on pandemic. We're all figuring this out as we go. Whatever you decide to do, just simply state what you did and why. Beware of both over and under identifying students. Remember, primary reason, you know, the pandemic's affecting us all. We just want to make sure it's not the primary reason why we're qualifying the student for specially designed instruction. And don't be shy about getting consultation. You know, set up peer-to-peer consultation. Brown bags can be kind of helpful, where you meet up over lunch, bring your brown bag lunch and kind of talk, you know, what you're going through. If you are using Facebook groups and things like that to consult, just be mindful of confidentiality. Removing a student's name is not sufficient by most ethical standards for protecting confidentiality. So instead of hopping on a group of who knows who and saying, hey, I need help with a case, and giving all the information with the student's name, Instead of doing that, just say, hey, I could use a consultation from somebody on an LD case that's kind of tricky. Can I connect with somebody and let me send you my email? We'll set up a time to call. That's a little bit more appropriate. And if you're not aware, NASP also has a Find a Mentor program. It is free as part of your membership. So if you're a seasoned person in the field and you want to sign up to mentor, you can go in their database. And if you're new and you need a mentor, you can hop in there and find a mentor. So you can connect with somebody that maybe you can ask ongoing questions about as you're trying to figure out this process. And I think lastly here, just to let you know, this just came across my desk the other day. We do have a free Patan training coming up on supporting students and teachers during COVID that might have some helpful suggestions. All right, and we got that with 3 minutes to go.
Not all the time for discussion and questions that we had, I think, originally planned.
Yeah. So if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you want to use the raise your hand feature, we can look for folks that way.
Mm-hmm. If anyone's feeling particularly brave and wants to ask a question verbally, that's fine too.
Glad it was helpful. You're welcome.
I think I saw a question from Danielle.
Danielle, okay. I'm sorry, there's 5 pages. So if you see Danielle, if you could unmute her so she could ask, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Hi, I didn't have a question. I was just doing the clapping reaction. I'm a second-year student in my program, and this was just really valuable to learn from people who are doing it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for, as a second-year student, congratulations on speaking up at a conference with 90 people in the room.
And sorry that you need to learn about school psychology this way. I apologize for the field.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough time to be learning.
Yeah, somebody happened in the chat. Knowing you're not you're not alone, it gives you some comfort, but doesn't really let the angst go away. And that's true. You know, this is not an easy time to do this. This job's never easy. It's really not easy now. So just, again, you're going to do the best you can with the resources you have and the circumstances you find yourself in, and that's all you can be expected to do. Period. There's no shame in just saying you're doing the best, because that's really, that can all be expected of us at this time.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just know, if you're a rookie, it'll change. It'll still be hard, but it'll get it,
It looks like there was a question about handling parent requests.
Oh, yes. So from Lauren. Yeah. So a good question. I think, so all parent requests, no matter who they come, if they come to the teacher or to myself directly, my first kind of thing I do about that is obviously call the parent and talk about their concerns. What are their concerns? What's going on? What have they been experiencing? One of the main questions I ask in that initial conversation is, is this something you noticed prior to school disruption, or has this been something that's developed since we've been out of school? Honestly, I think, depending on the motivations of the parent, most of them are, oh yeah, it was happening before. So, but really trying to get them to tease out while they're speaking to you, is this something that was happening prior to the school closures versus not? I have been sending out, so, in that conversation with parents and explaining all of the things that we're providing as a district during virtual learning. So all of the social emotional supports, all of the tier 3 and tier 2 reading and math supports that we're providing. If at the end of that conversation, the parent is, happy of, okay, I think a lot of parents, like, there's maybe almost a communication or a PR gap where, like, they don't exactly know everything the district's doing because everything's online. So they're not quite sure what their kiddo is doing throughout the day. Once after that conversation, if a parent says, oh, okay, I'm glad that there's, interventions being done, blah, blah, blah. I have had parents, I always send a PTE if they had put their request in writing, and get them to sign that they don't want to request an evaluation at this time. So they just check off that they deny the evaluation. But I mean, unfortunately, I would like to tell you, Lauren, that I've been successful with a lot of those conversations about getting parents to wait. I have not. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would say I have to say I've been hit or miss. So typically I try to approach the first conversation when a parent request comes in more as like an initial consultation. So I'm finding them spending like 45 minutes on the phone with these parents, but I'm trying to, again, just try to see what they're seeing, right? So they're seeing and just again try to get a sense for what's going on in their house, because right now you could have families that maybe had some dysfunctional family dynamics, and what's going on is the kid has no escape. Like before, the kid might have had an opportunity to go to school, get a break, everyone get to kind of take a break from each other and then reconvene. But now that break is gone, and it can kind of exacerbate things that happen. So what I've been kind of seeing is that, obviously if a parent requests, we have to offer it. That's policy in our district. I think that's advised in most places. But, I have a long, thorough conversation with them about what they're actually seeing. And if and I give them my honest opinion. If I look at their records and say, I wouldn't normally identify this kid for an assessment, I wouldn't. I would tell them, hey, this isn't a kid I would normally have a concern about and want testing done, but you do have the right to request it if you want me to do it. And what I have found is that a lot of them most of them will say, yes, please send the form, but I'm not getting them all back. So I've been doing follow-up calls, and some are changing their minds. Some are seeing changes and differences. Some just aren't responding. So, in our district, our policy is we make the 2 requests. We send it out twice. And if it doesn't come back after a certain amount of time, we send a formal letter saying we can't test because you won't give us consent. But that's just kind of what I'm noticing in terms of like at the secondary level. I am getting like kind of like mixed, where some parents are like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't test, and the other parents just want you to test.
Mm-hmm. I think also our district's in a unique position where hybrid has been approved and is on the horizon. So I think we have seen a little bit of a, I don't know about you, Katie, but a little bit of a lull in the parent request, because I think they see that hybrid coming down the line as like a little bit of a, okay, I'll see if that changes things. Like I'll see if that helps my kiddo.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. I was going to say, I was in a re-eval discussion for a student like a week or 2 ago, and that was exactly it. It was a student who's identified as ED, and the parent was just insisting that we needed to do a new eval. And kind of as a team, we were saying, well, we think these issues are due to the pandemic. The kid's already got supports. Can we revisit this at the IEP meeting in a month? And they were okay with that. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But yeah, definitely. I'm seeing like a knock on wood, a lull.
Yeah.
All right. I had a couple of parents wait. Matt says I had a couple of parents agree to wait when I was transparent about wanting to collaborate and take the request seriously, but helping them understand that if I move forward, the student would not qualify based on exclusionary factors, helping them just wait a couple of months and review after the next set of benchmarks and progress monitoring data. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, Matt, you bring up a good point, like educating parents a little bit more about the process of SLD or the exclusionary criteria that we normally use. I don't know that in a conversation I would normally explain to parents that thoroughly about the exclusionary criteria, but I think we're in a place right now where maybe we have to have those conversations with parents and kind of clue them in a little bit about like, hey, when I see your kid, this is the stuff I have to use as a rule out, and I'm not going to be able to do that right now. So I think that's important. Yeah. Cause I don't know that I would normally have that kind of conversation with a parent at the start. So yeah, good point.
By the way, are you Matt Davis from PCOM that went to school with us? Because it's so good to see you.
It's me. I was going to hop in later to say hi. I was going to chat earlier, but you guys were getting ready, so I'm like, I'll wait till after.
Oh, good to see you.
Good to see you guys
thanks
too.
to see you, Matt. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Oh, and good suggestion from somebody down here. I found it's very helpful to parents to determine exact date when we will revisit their request. That's a great idea. Yeah. Just because I think just parents want to make sure, somebody's helping them out and they feel heard, so if you just let them know like, hey, I see what you're saying, but I think there could be other things going on, could we revisit this in 30 days or something,
Yeah. And to make sure that our kid's not going to get lost. Like, as much as we know that, there's a lot of needs and a lot of kids who are struggling, the parents know that too. I mean, they know that there's a lot of kids in the schools who are struggling, so they don't want their kid to get lost in the shuffle. So yeah, and especially at like, if, from a core team perspective with tier 2 and tier 3, really in the past, we wouldn't give a parent an exact date. We would just say, hey, we're going to revisit this child's data in 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll let you know if we're seeing progress or not and how we're going to proceed, if we're going to move them to tier 3 or if we're going to, do testing. That would be our kind of more general conversation with a parent in that process. But I would say, yeah, for sure, we've been a little bit more explicit about like 6 weeks is this date, and you should expect to hear from us around that time. that's when we'll be revisiting your child's progress. So yeah. Oh, another PCOM grad, yay.
Yay. We are everywhere.
If there's no other questions or anything like that, this is your lunchtime, guys. So feel free to, I guess, sign off and head to lunch and then come back for the afternoon sessions. And we thank all of you for your participation and your attendance.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Katie and Megan. We really appreciate it. That was great information, and enjoy your lunches, and hopefully you'll be joining for some sessions this afternoon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.